Reddit, the basement apartment on Elm Street. Before you start listening to this, I have one strict condition. Look at your phone battery. If it's below 15%, plug it in right now. Do not let your screen go dark while I am speaking, because once the silence hits, your mind will start playing tricks on you. You'll start listening to the walls. And trust me, you don't want to hear what's inside them. My name is Maya. I am 24 years old. If you looked at my life 3 months ago, I was exactly who you wanted to be. I had just graduated top of my class, moved out of my parents' house, and secured a corporate position as a junior risk analyst at Vanguard Analytics. I was independent. I bought my own furniture, paid my own rent, and managed my own life. I felt powerful. Young professionals like us, the 18 to 34 demographic, we share the same collective anxieties. We are hyper-aware. We check the back seat of our Uber rides. We look for the tiny pinhole lenses in Airbnb utility clocks. We know what a trap boy looks like on Tinder. We think that by consuming endless hours of true crime podcasts and reading Reddit horror stories before bed, we have somehow vaccinated ourselves against evil. We think we are too smart to be victims. That pride is exactly what they count on. The monsters of today don't hide in the bushes. They don't wear masks. They study data. They know your salary, your daily commute, your favorite coffee order, and the exact frequency of your heartbeat when you're startled. I'm speaking to you from a location I cannot disclose. The police told me to disappear, but I know disappearing won't save me. They already have my digital footprint. If you are living alone in a suburban house or an apartment with low security, please listen to my mistakes, because by the time you see the red flags, you're already inside the cage. Let's talk about the setup. In the West, especially in old money suburbs, there's a specific type of real estate. Massive Victorian houses built in the late 19th century, surrounded by dense acres of pine and oak trees. The neighbors aren't across the street, they are across the valley. I found a listing on a private rental forum, a beautiful basement apartment on Elm Street, located in Blackwood, an affluent, isolated suburb 40 minutes outside the city. The house belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Gable, an elderly couple who were rarely there. Mr. Gable had severe cardiovascular issues, and his wife stayed with him at a specialized rehabilitation resort in Vermont for 9 months out of the year. The rent was impossibly cheap, $800 a month, all utilities included. For a fresh graduate trying to pay off student loans, it felt like a miracle. It had a private entrance through the overgrown backyard, a small patio, and large glass windows that looked out into the dark woods. But old houses have architectural quirks. My basement apartment didn't have a modern concrete ceiling. Instead, it had massive exposed oak beams. Above those beams, separating my ceiling from the floorboards of the main house above, was a 4-foot structural gap, a crawl space. In the middle of my hallway ceiling, there was a square wooden hatch, painted over several times, that led up into that darkness. Mr. Gable told me during the initial walkthrough, with his voice trembling with age, that it was just for the old copper plumbing. He said there was nothing up there but dust and old fiberglass insulation, and that it was best to leave it shut. I agreed. I had no reason to go up there. I bought a white noise machine to drown out the silence of the woods, set up my laptop on the kitchen counter, and began my independent life. But isolation does things to your brain. After a month of working 10-hour shifts at Vanguard Analytics, coming home to an empty, silent basement in the woods started to wear on me. The shadows of the pine trees outside my window look a little too much like fingers. I needed human connection. I needed a distraction. So like millions of others, I opened Tinder. I swiped through the garbage, the gym selfies, the guys posing with dead fish, the obvious bots. Then I matched with Julian. The first red flag was the hyper-curated normalcy. Julian's profile was a masterpiece of safety. He was 28, wore elegant wire-rimmed glasses, had a neatly trimmed beard, and his photos showed him reading in dusty indie bookstores, visiting art galleries, or hiking through the foggy trails of the Pacific Northwest. His bio read, Senior Strategy Consultant, lover of architecture, vinyl records, and deep conversations. Tell me your favorite book. His first message wasn't a pickup line. It was a thoughtful question about a classical literature book visible on my nightstand in one of my photos. He was articulate. He didn't text back instantly. He always waited between 15 to 30 minutes. It felt deliberate, respectful, like he had a busy, fulfilling life. We arranged our first date at the Arch, a high-end, quiet coffee shop located just 2 blocks from my office building downtown. When Julian walked into the coffee shop, he carried a physical presence that immediately put me at ease. He brought an actual hard-copy vintage edition of the book we had discussed. He wore a charcoal cashmere sweater that smelled faintly of cedarwood and high-end cologne. He ordered a black Americano with a single cube of raw brown sugar. I laughed and told him there was no way that it was my exact order. Julian smiled, his eyes crinkling warmly behind his glasses, and said it was a sign of good taste. Or maybe we just appreciated things without the unnecessary fluff. That was the second red flag, excessive psychological mirroring. Over the course of that 2-hour date, it felt like I was talking to a male version of myself. Every opinion I had on art, politics, corporate fatigue, and lifestyle, he agreed with perfectly. If I expressed a dislike for a certain restaurant, he would immediately share an anecdote about how terrible his experience was there. It felt like cosmic alignment. In reality, it was data extraction. He was downloading my personality in real time, adjusting his mask to fit my exact desires. I felt so comfortable that I let my guard down completely. I told him about the Elm Street apartment. I complained about the 40-minute drive through the dark suburban roads. I even laughed about the creepy crawl space hatch in my hallway. Julian listened with intense, unblinking focus. His pupils were slightly dilated. He leaned across the small wooden table and told me that an old Victorian in Blackwood was beautiful architecture, but highly isolated. He said that a young woman living completely alone down there needed to be hyper-aware because the world wasn't safe for someone as striking as me. I blushed. I thought it was protective masculinity. I thought he cared. Then I told him about my corporate routine. I told him I usually worked late until 7:30 or 8 p.m. because as a junior analyst, I had to prove myself. I told him I always parked on the level B3 of the underground office garage because the monthly pass was $50 cheaper than the upper levels. Julian's fingers traced the rim of his coffee cup. He murmured the words, level B3. He told me the concrete structures down there were massive, creating perfect blind spots behind the support pillars. He advised me to always look under my car before I approached it, because people don't realize how easy it is for someone to slide beneath a chassis in the dark. I felt a shiver down my spine, but thanked him for the advice. When the date ended, he walked me back to the glass lobby of Vanguard Analytics. He gave me a polite, lingering hug. As I rode the elevator up to the 4th floor, my skin felt warm. I felt like I had finally found a good man. I didn't notice that he hadn't actually told me anything substantial about his own life. I didn't know where he lived. I didn't know the name of his consulting firm. He had spent 2 hours asking questions, and I had spent 2 hours giving him the keys to my entire routine. By the 2nd month, Julian and I were officially seeing each other. We went to nice dinners, visited jazz clubs, but he never invited me to his place. He claimed his apartment downtown was undergoing a complete mold remediation due to a burst pipe. I accepted it. He stayed at my basement apartment a few times, but he was always restless, constantly looking out the large glass windows into the dark woods. Meanwhile, my corporate life was turning into a nightmare. There was a man named Marcus who worked in the IT infrastructure department. His office was on the 3rd floor, directly underneath mine. Marcus was the classic embodiment of the office creep. He was quiet, had unkempt hair, and wore stained button-down shirts. But what made him terrifying was his behavior in the elevators. Whenever I got in, Marcus would miraculously appear. He wouldn't look at the floor buttons. He would just stand in the corner, breathing heavily, staring at the reflection of my legs in the polished steel doors. One rainy Thursday, around 7:45 p.m., I went down to the office cafeteria to grab a bottle of water. The floor was completely dark, save for the vending machines. I turned around, and Marcus was standing there. He had walked up so silently I hadn't heard a thing. He told me I was working late again, his voice trembling and eager. I told him I had a deadline and tried to push past him. He stepped into my path, way too close. The smell of stale cigarettes and old sweat was overpowering. He told me the underground garage was dangerous at night and that the motion sensors on B3 were broken. He said he saw my car down there, a silver Honda, and offered to walk me down to keep me safe. That was the 3rd red flag, unwarranted boundary crossing. He knew my car. He had been tracking my vehicle in a private corporate garage. I told him firmly to leave me alone, pulled my arm away, and ran back to my cubicle with my heart racing. When I finally left the building at 8:30 p.m., the underground garage was an icy tomb of gray concrete. The air was thick with the smell of carbon monoxide and damp earth. I took the elevator down to B3. When the doors opened, the lights over the elevator bank clicked on, but the rest of the floor was cast in deep, heavy shadows. I walked rapidly toward my car, pulling my keys out, holding the metal teeth between my knuckles, just like I had read on Reddit. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed from the far side of the garage. I stopped dead in my tracks. From behind a massive concrete pillar near the exit ramp, a figure stepped out. It was a man in a long dark coat and a low-brimmed baseball cap. He didn't approach me. He just stood in the shadow, his body perfectly still, watching me. I panicked. I ran the remaining 20 yards to my car, unlocked it, threw myself inside, and slammed the locks down. I turned the ignition, threw the car into reverse, and flooded the gas pedal. exit ramp, they illuminated the man's face for a fraction of a second. It was Marcus. He had a look of absolute manic desperation on his face. I drove home crying, tears blurring my vision. The moment I unlocked my basement door, I called Julian. I sobbed into the phone, telling him everything. Marcus in the cafeteria, Marcus tracking my car, Marcus waiting for me in the dark of level B3. Julian's response was cold, sharp, and immediate. The gentle intellectual was gone. He asked if Marcus had touched my car. I told him no, he just stood there, but that I was terrified and couldn't go back to work. Julian told me to calm down and listen very carefully. He told me not to report this to HR because Vanguard Analytics would only protect their own liability and make me look like the crazy one. He told me to let him handle Marcus. He said he had resources and knew people in tech security and promised he would ensure Marcus never stepped foot in my building again. He asked if I trusted him. I told him I did. On Monday morning, I walked into the office with my heart in my throat, but Marcus wasn't there. By noon, our department head announced that Marcus had abruptly resigned over the weekend due to a sudden family crisis and had broken his lease to move out of state. His corporate account was deactivated. I felt an immense wave of relief. Julian had done it. He had saved me. I texted him that Marcus was gone and called him my hero. Julian replied instantly, telling me that he eliminates threats to what belongs to him and that I was safe now. I stared at the phrase "what belongs to me." I felt a tiny subconscious ping of anxiety, but I ignored it. I thought it was his way of being intensely romantic. I didn't realize that to Julian, Marcus wasn't a threat to my safety. Marcus was a competitor tampering with his property. The third month is when the reality of my life began to splinter. With Marcus gone, the office was peaceful, but my sanctuary on Elm Street was changing. It started with the odor. A faint, sickeningly sweet, metallic smell began to permeate the hallway right outside my bathroom. It smelled like wet dust mixed with something biological, like a large rat had crawled between the walls and died. I bought heavy air fresheners, but the scent only grew thicker, settling into the back of my throat like copper. Then came the sounds. Every night, around 2:45 a.m., the white noise machine wasn't enough. I would wake up to a distinct, rhythmic dragging sound directly above my mattress. It sounded like a heavy sack of laundry being pulled slowly across the raw wooden beams of the crawl space. Sometimes I would hear a dull thud, followed by a series of rapid, desperate taps against the floorboards of the main house above. I convinced myself it was wildlife. It was a rural area. Raccoons, possums, maybe a stray dog had found a way into the upper structure while the gables were away. To manage the terror, I forced myself into a strict routine. I would lock my bedroom door, plug my AirPods in, turn the volume up to 80%, and listen to long Reddit horror compilations until my eyes grew heavy and I passed out. It was my only escape from the house. The breaking point happened on a Saturday afternoon. Julian had spent the night before. Around 1 p.m., I told him I was going to run down to the local organic market to get ingredients for dinner. He declined to come, claiming he had an urgent conference call with a European client. I left him alone in my apartment for roughly 90 minutes. When I returned, the apartment was silent. Julian was sitting on the armchair, his glasses off, his eyes. He looked exhausted, his hands covered in a faint layer of grey dust. I asked if he was okay. He offered a weak smile and said it was just a long haul, adding that the dust in these old houses really triggered his allergies. 3 days later, I was taking a long, scalding shower after a brutal day at work. The bathroom was dense with white steam. I stepped out, wrapped a towel around myself, and wiped the fog off the mirror. As I looked up to dry my hair, the bright halogen light caught a strange reflection inside the plastic housing of the ceiling smoke detector. It was a microscopic, circular glint of blue-coated glass. My heart did a violent flip in my chest. The room felt suddenly freezing. I dragged the plastic laundry hamper over, climbed on top of it, and twisted the smoke detector off its plastic bracket. It didn't have wires connecting it to the house. It was powered by a heavy-duty, cylindrical lithium battery pack. Glued securely next to the fake test button was an ultra-wide-angle spy camera lens, its microscopic microphone indicator glowing a dull, invisible infrared red. I dropped the device. It shattered on the tile floor. Panic overtook me. I ran into my bedroom, completely naked, my skin covered in goosebumps. I grabbed the digital alarm clock on my nightstand, the sleek, minimalist wooden clock that Julian had gifted me 2 weeks prior because my phone clock wasn't reliable enough. I smashed it against the corner of the dresser. The wooden casing split open. Inside, nested perfectly within the digital components, was a second high-definition lens positioned at a perfect 45-degree angle to view my entire bed. I checked the air conditioning vent in the living room. A third lens. I was living in a digital fishbowl. Someone had spent months watching every intimate, private moment of my life. They saw me sleep, they saw me cry, they heard every phone call to my mother. This was the fourth red flag, the gift of unsolicited electronics. My mind raced. Who had the password to my Wi-Fi? Who spent 90 minutes alone in my apartment with grey dust on his hands? Julian. I didn't scream. I didn't call him. I threw on a pair of sweatpants, shoved the broken cameras into my purse, grabbed my car keys, and fled the house. I drove like a maniac through the dark, winding roads of Blackwood, heading straight for the Central Police Precinct downtown. It was nearly midnight when I was brought into a small, sterile interview room. A veteran detective named Miller sat across from me. He looked tired, his desk littered with paper cups. I dumped the shattered smoke detector and the broken clock onto the metal table and told him someone put them in my apartment and that I thought it was my boyfriend. Detective Miller frowned, picking up the pieces with gloved hands. He called an IT forensic specialist into the room. The specialist plugged the memory core of the bathroom camera into a diagnostic tablet. He told the detective that these weren't basic commercial cameras, but industrial-grade secure stream units that streamed via the apartment's Wi-Fi network directly to an encrypted cloud server. 5 minutes passed. The only sound in the room was the hum of the fluorescent lights. Detective Miller's phone buzzed. He answered it, listened for 30 seconds, and his expression turned to stone. He hung up and looked at me. He told me they just ran the plates and the background check on the name Julian Vance, and that the identity was completely fraudulent. He explained that the social security number he used belonged to a man who died in 2014, and that my boyfriend's real name was Julian Cross. He said Julian was a former high-level systems engineer for a major defense contractor who had been fired 3 years ago after being caught running a massive voyeurs ring inside a corporate housing complex. He told me Julian was a professional stalker who targeted young, isolated professional women through dating apps. I stared at him, my mouth open, unable to process the words. I told him that Julian had saved me and made Marcus leave. The IT specialist suddenly gasped, pointing at his tablet. He told the detective to look at the server log cache, pointing out a secondary directory in the cloud account labeled Project Elm Street. He said there were image files uploaded from a different device on the same local network today. Miller turned the screen toward me. The image was a high-resolution photograph taken inside a dark, confined space. I could see old dusty Victorian roof joists, pink fiberglass insulation, and heavy iron pipes. The crawl space, in the center of the photo, illuminated by a small battery-powered LED lantern, was a man. He was stripped to his waist, his body tied tightly to a central support beam with industrial zip ties. His mouth was sealed with layer after layer of thick silver duct tape. His chest was covered in dark purple contusions, his eyes bloodshot and wide with an expression of primal, screaming terror. It was Marcus, the IT guy from my office. He hadn't resigned. He hadn't moved out of state. Julian hadn't threatened him. He had tracked Marcus to the parking garage on level B3, abducted him, dragged his body through the isolated backyard entrance of my house, and stuffed him into the 4-foot crawl space directly above my apartment. The dragging sounds at 2:45 a.m., the rhythmic buds against the floorboards, the sweet, rotting metallic smell. It wasn't animals, it was Marcus. He had been starving, dying, suffocating in the dark right above my head for 3 weeks. He had been kicking the beams, desperately trying to make enough noise to wake me up, and down below, I had sat in my bed, completely oblivious, with my noise-canceling AirPods in, listening to horror stories to fall asleep. Detective Miller slammed his hand on the table and ordered a tactical unit to the Elm Street address immediately. He turned to me and told me I was staying there under protective custody because they didn't know where Cross was. But the horror was too much for my brain to handle. The walls of the police station felt like they were closing in. I felt like I couldn't breathe. While Miller was screaming orders into his radio, I quietly walked out of the interview room, slipped through the exit doors, and ran to my car. I didn't go back to Elm Street. I drove blindly, tears blurring my eyes, heading north onto the interstate. I drove for 2 hours until my gas tank was nearly empty. I pulled off at a desolate exit in a different county, found a rundown, cash-only motel called The Pines, and checked in under a fake name. I locked the door, slid a heavy metal bolt into place, and pushed the cheap wooden dresser against the door frame. I sat on the edge of the mattress, my body shaking uncontrollably. I needed to tell someone. I needed to leave a digital record in case the police couldn't find him. That's when I opened Reddit and started typing. That was yesterday. This morning, Detective Miller called my burner phone. His voice sounded broken. He told me the SWAT team breached the house on Elm Street, but the crawl space was empty. He said Julian Cross had cleared out the entire server array before they arrived. Marcus was gone. The zip ties were cut, and there was blood on He had a keylogger installed on my phone through the Wi-Fi network. He could see every text, every call, every location marker. He saw when I went to the police. He saw my GPS route. He had gone completely off the grid. I hung up the phone. I sat in the silence of this cheap motel room, staring at the walls. The air freshener smelled faintly of artificial pine, but underneath it, I could swear I smelled that same sweet, metallic copper scent. Then, my phone buzzed. An unknown number, no text, just an unlisted, secure web link. My fingers acted on their own. I clicked it. It loaded a dark web page with a single video player. The video feed was live. The resolution was crystal clear, shot in low light infrared. The camera angle was tilted downwards, looking through a thin rectangular gap between two ceiling tiles. In the frame of the live stream video was a young woman with messy dark hair sitting on a lumpy motel bed with a floral bedsheet, staring down at her phone screen in total, paralyzed horror. It was me. I slowly, agonizingly turned my head up toward the ceiling of this motel room. It isn't a plaster ceiling. It's a cheap commercial drop ceiling made of lightweight acoustic tiles, the kind you can easily lift up with a single hand from the space above. The space that connects every single room in this motel through a continuous, hollow crawl space. And in the absolute dead silence of the night, the rain outside stopped. Directly above the corner of my bed, one of the white acoustic ceiling tiles slowly, silently lifted up by 2 inches. In the pitch black gap of the ceiling, the dim light from my phone screen caught the reflection of 2 wire-rimmed glasses. And then a voice whispered from the dark, smooth, polite, and perfectly intellectual. You forgot to check the blind spots, Maya. If this post doesn't get updated, if the police find this phone on the floor, please don't look for the perfect match. Don't trust the cheap rent. And whatever you do, never sleep in the dark.